rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Welcome to Wednesday's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. This is your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, I want to talk to you about a new movie that we're sponsoring at Salem. From Affirm Films comes Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world, George Foreman. I remember that fight. Oh my God, I love that. Based on the true story of one of the greatest comebacks of all time and the transformational power of second chances. Again, Big George Foreman is the name of the movie, starring Chris Davis and Academy Award winner Forrest Whitaker. The movie is rated PG-13. It may be inappropriate for children under the age of 12. It's only in theaters beginning April 28th. Beginning April 28th. For tickets and showtimes, go to BigGeorgeForeman.movie. Again, BigGeorgeForeman.movie. I cannot wait to see that. Also, let me talk to you about another movie that's going to inspire you. It is called Pardoned by Grace, and you can find it at salemnow.com. From the makers of Graham Family Films comes a powerful and inspiring true story that's going to touch your heart and renew your faith. Introducing Pardoned by Grace, the incredible journey of Scott Heiberger, played by Joey Lawrence, a convicted criminal turned prison minister who defies all odds and receives an unlikely pardon to continue his ministry on the outside. Featuring Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Michael W. Smith as Heiberger's pastor, Pardoned by Grace showcases the transformative power of redemption and the boundless reach of God's love. Watch Pardoned by Grace on salemnow.com, and when you purchase a copy at salemnow.com, a DVD will be donated to Scott Heiberger's nonprofit prison ministry, and it is called Behind the Wire Ministries, which provides hope and support to the incarcerated. Together, we can share the power of faith and forgiveness with those who need it most. Visit salemnow.com to purchase your DVD and donate to this incredible cause today. Man. All right, so two great movies, Big George Foreman, Big George Foreman, BigGeorgeForeman.movie, and of course, Pardoned by Grace at salemnow.com. And while we're at it, you may as well not forget to get your new MyPillow 2.0. All right. So MyPillow 2.0, go to MyPillow.com, click on the radio listener square at the top of the page, enter my name, Carl, spelled C-A-R-L, or if you prefer, give them a call at 800-858-0263. Not only do you get one new MyPillow, it's a buy one, get one free offer exclusive to my listeners when you go to MyPillow.com and click on that radio listener square and enter my name, Carl, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. These pillows come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. I guarantee you are going to love them. The new MyPillow 2.0 comes with the same patented adjusted feel as the original MyPillow, but now they have this new fabric, this outer layer that dissipates heat, making it softer, smoother, and cooler for you to lay your head on. You're going to absolutely love the pillows, and you're going to get a good night's sleep. Go to MyPillow.com, enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. Now, stay tuned. We got a great show ahead of us. You are not going to miss it. We got some quick program messaging, and we'll get started. Okay, guys, so welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. I've been looking forward to speaking with my guest today, Mike McCormick. He is a former White House stenographer. He basically witnessed a crime take place with Joe Biden inside of Air Force Two. It's insane. I had the privilege of hearing an interview with him with my buddies, the American Adversaries, here on The Answer Orlando. And I contacted Chris right away, and I was like, I've not heard this guy on your show before. I've got to get him on. And so now he's on. So I'm looking forward to speaking with him. Mike McCormick, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast.
Thanks so much, Carl. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And first off, Mike, let's give your information out because I want people to follow you. I want people to follow your Substack. I want people to understand the corruption, the man that is so corrupt that is inside of the White House. Where can people go to follow you if they want to learn more about this Biden crime family?
So I'm writing my Substack. It's called Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. It's on Substack. And basically, I was a White House stenographer starting in 2002 through 2018. So I worked for Bush, I worked for Obama, and when I worked for Obama, mostly I worked for Biden. And I worked for 1 year for Trump. So I don't really have a political leaning one way or the other. I'm just a federal employee. For most of the time, I was a contractor. My politics didn't really matter to, enough to worry about who I worked for. I just wanted to do a good job for the White House. And so I also wrote some books, Joe Biden Unauthorized and the 2020 Crack Up of the Democratic Party. I published that 3 years ago, just as the shutdowns were coming out. And I wrote a book called 15 Years of Deplorable. That's based on sort of being Joe Biden's stenographer as Trump was on the rise. And I looked around and said, Trump's going to win this thing. And no one in the White House and no one in the press corps understood that.
Wow, that is fascinating. That is so man, that is so interesting. I would have loved to have been in your place to just see their reactions.
Yeah. Well, part of it meant having to work for Joe Biden, which as a stenographer is not easy.
I heard you say that to my buddy Nasra Dennis. Let me ask you this about Joe Biden real quickly before we get into some of the specifics here. What was your take on him just as a person, as a politician? Was this a guy that appeared to be smart? Was he mean? Was he condescending? What was he like compared to let's say Obama, or compared to George W. Bush, or compared to some of these other guys that you literally took transcripts for?
Right. That's a really good question, and there's a lot to answer there. Basically, what I try to do in that book, Joe Biden Unauthorized, was put across the point that I don't think he's presidential. He just seemed to be slippery and very self-serving. But that's typical of all politicians. I don't think there's a politician out there who isn't like that. But so then what happened was about a year and a half ago, I got a hold of a copy of the Hunter Biden laptop. And that was through Marco Polo. They're a non-profit anti-corruption organization. And so I got a hold of them, and they gave me this laptop. I've been digging into it, and what I've seen about Joe Biden is there's criminality, and there's, to me, downright evil. The amount of his pride, unspoken pride behind the scenes, and was what compelled him to do things that are in the laptop that shouldn't have been done, and crimes, and even worse.
Okay, that's interesting. His pride allowed him to do things that are just straight up criminal and evil, if you will. Expound on that. What do you mean by that? His pride as compared to others. His was there just an audacity, if you will, that he had in his position as vice president? What do you mean by that exactly?
So he came into the White House in 2008 as Obama, or he was on the campaign in 2008, came into the White House in 2009 as Obama's vice president. He spent more time in the cabinet room working on like policy matters than President Obama did at the beginning of the at the beginning of the administration. Yeah. He was working on the American Reform Act or something. So he had this driving ambition to be president, and he hid that. And that's what comes out in the laptop. So in 2011, he signs up. All of a sudden, there's this weird development with Joe Biden and the then vice president of China, Xi Jinping. And they become like this amazing foreign policy relationship. They know each other. They're great friends. But my question was, at the time, well, why did this happen? Whose idea was it? As I look into the laptop, it was the Chinese idea. And they kind of manipulated Biden's ambition into this role where he would do anything for the Chinese to become president. And I think that's what happened.
Wow, that is fascinating. That is fascinating. All right, so you say Now, again, I'm speaking with my guest, Mike McCormick. You can check him out on Substack. Mike, I looked up on Substack. It was mmccormick.substack.com, but you gave me another name. Do you want to repeat that?
The name of it is Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil.
Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. So Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. Okay, guys. So make sure you check out and subscribe to his Substack. All right. You say that you can tie Joe Biden directly to Hunter Biden's board position on the Ukrainian natural gas company, Burisma. How can you do that?
So that's right. So, it wasn't just China. There was a lot of corruption through there. So what happened was I was on the airplane, Air Force Two. We were flying into Ukraine, April 21st, 2014. And Biden's then national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, comes walking to the back of the plane, and he says, he does a briefing, and one of the press, and my role as a stenographer is to sit there with a recorder, record everything he says, and then make the official transcript. Well, after I got a hold of the laptop and I was writing these substacks, I was writing, hey, there was a lot of corruption. They were planning this Burisma thing. When I saw the transcript that I wrote, and this was back in about November of 2022, not too long ago, I realized that Jake Sullivan had been previewing the corruption that would come out of Burisma in this discussion he had with the press. They asked him, what's the energy? What are the energy assistance you bringing? He goes, well, we're bringing stuff for unconventional gas resources. That's fracking. That was Burisma's specialty. He also said, we're bringing assistance that will help them reform their high energy emissions. So they basically wanted to sort of refurbish municipal buildings. They had a program in USAID called that. Well, he's making those statements, but Hunter Biden is already on the board of Burisma. And Burisma winds up in like 9 months later with a grant from USAID to get this energy reform money straight out from the U.S. taxpayers. There's legislation put in, $50 million goes to refurbishing pipelines and infrastructure for Burisma. So all this was in the works before Joe went. This is the crime. Joe knew his son was on the board of Burisma, and he put these policies in place to enrich his son and himself through U.S. taxpayer dollars. It was a kickback scheme.
That is so perfect here, Mike. It's funny. That was going to be my next question to you. So Joe Biden knew beforehand. I mean, his son was already on the board. He completely lied, said he didn't know about his son's business dealings in the past, yet his son was already on the board, of Burisma, because in fact, he was on the board because of Joe Biden. And so he obviously knew all of this beforehand, but just continued to lie to the American people. So this is just fascinating. And you were there at the time, Mike. Let me ask you, did you recognize at the time what you were witnessing, or was it more like now that you've been able to look into Hunter Biden's laptop, you're like, oh crap? I mean, like there's this like. Oh my God, I was there. It's confirming things that maybe you suspected or didn't realize at the time. Talk to us about that.
Exactly. So on that plane, and that's what I wrote the book about, Joe Biden Unauthorized. I mean, that came out 3 years ago before I had the laptop. So there was a lot of weird things that he did that I talk about. There's some really sort of shady deals that he did with shady people. He got, embarrassed in Moscow by Vladimir Putin. And so my perception of him was he was not presidential, but he wasn't criminal. Well, having gone through the laptop, he's criminal. So the press had that same impression. No one at the time we're flying in, it's not announced that Hunter Biden is on the board, but about 2 weeks later, in the middle of May, he was announced publicly on the board. There was a little bit of a inquiry, and then it was stopped. And meanwhile, Joe was going back and forth. Joe called the president of Ukraine, personally called him over 80 times from June 2014 through 2016. They were like thick as thieves would be the term.
Wow.
Like Obama called him 10 times. Right? And these are records I've gotten out of the White House, Obama's whitehouse.gov website. I mean, you can go in and look at the transcripts. They do these things called readouts. There's over 80 readouts of phone calls with Joe Biden and President Peter Poroshenko. 80. What were they talking about? What were they planning?
Okay, this is, literally, Mike, let me pick my jaw up here. This is unbelievable. Did Joe Biden, let me do this. Actually, let me do this, because you said something that you touched on something that I didn't follow up on. I want to make sure I do. Actually, two things. Xi Jinping, and he was embarrassed by Putin. Xi Jinping was the vice president at the time. He seemed to be playing Biden like a violin, if you will. Is there something specific you can add to that story? And then you said he was embarrassed by Putin. I'd like to know what that entailed or what that looked like. And then going back to 80 calls to the president of Ukraine at the time, was there nobody, including Barack Obama, that was saying, Joe, what's going on? What the heck are you doing?
I mean, these were all reported to the press. They put out in these called readouts. So they put this paper out saying, Vice President Biden had a phone call today with President Poroshenko. They were talking about, security activities in Ukraine, in the Eastern Donbass. Just sort of basic, very short, one paragraph things. 80 of them. What else? What didn't they say he was talking about? So that's one thing. So then you asked about Xi Jinping. So here's an interesting thing about Xi Jinping. He had a big meeting with Xi Jinping in 2013, December. So this is the trip that Hunter Biden is on the plane for. Biden's on the plane. And the thing is, so there was a big meeting. It was supposed to be an hour. It went to 4 hours. Joe Biden made a public statement at the bottom of the thing. The press is waiting for the statement. The staff is like sitting around. They didn't know what to do. I was at the building. They wouldn't let me in the door. So I had to wait out in the motorcade. And I thought it was just going to be an hour wait. It was a 4-hour wait. So Biden makes a statement. He apologizes to everyone on the Chinese side. I'm sorry I kicked you out of the room. It was just him and Xi Jinping for 2 hours. What happened after that unusual meeting, that's very unusual, a vice president of the United States talking to the president of China for 2 hours. Obama didn't get that kind of personal time with Xi Jinping. What was going on? So what comes out of that is the Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners starts investing heavily in a company called Metabiota. Metabiota is a pandemic predictor. At the time, they're a biotech from Silicon Valley. At the time, they were conducting research with EcoHealth Alliance and virologists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China about bat viruses. They were examining bat scat. It was funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, so the DoD was funding it. I guarantee that if that activity was going on in China, Xi Jinping knew about it. So out of this meeting comes this heavy investment in Metabiota. Metabiota then gets funding, magically appears just weeks later, $60 million for going and doing biodefense research in the Republic of Georgia, right on the border of Russia, and then into Ukraine. So Metabiota is also part of this grift that Joe Biden is running into Ukraine, but it goes deeper than that.
Okay, this is I have not heard this before. Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil is Mike McCormick's Substack. Make sure you subscribe to that. This is absolutely fascinating to me and frustrating to me, knowing that someone so evil and corrupt is sitting here leading the country and is just totally compromised by not just anyone, but some of our worst adversaries, which is insane to me. Wilmington, Delaware has selected a special prosecutor, a guy by the name of David Weiss. You want to get in front of that special prosecutor. to investigate Joe Biden's corruption. Basically, do you trust this guy, David Weiss, being in the heart of the beast, if you will, in Wilmington, Delaware, where I'm not necessarily convinced that people would turn on Joe Biden for fear of retribution?
Well, Carl, that's a great question. So I took this episode that happened on Air Force Two with Jake Sullivan and turned it into an FBI eyewitness tip, put it on the FBI website. That was about 6 weeks ago. If I do it and I'm lying to the FBI, I go to jail. I'm not lying and I'm not going to jail. I think they did a crime. This is the evidence I'm presenting to the FBI. Have not heard back. Typically, that would, and I've done a lot of time listening to grand jury proceedings as a stenographer in D.C. I listen to D.C. Superior Court, D.C. District Court. So, and I used to listen to the Lewinsky grand juries. I mean, I worked on some of those grand juries. So I know kind of how the process works. Sure. Usually the FBI does the investigation, brings it to the special prosecutor, and then the witnesses come in. That doesn't seem to be happening. Right now, I'm working on putting together an affidavit, a sworn affidavit that I'll present to David Weiss. It'll have a lot of evidence in it. Most of the evidence will be stuff that I've talked about right here and other things in my Substack. Some of the evidence won't be. We'll see how he handles it. But once it's a sworn affidavit, that's a legal document. And that can be put into, he's got to deal with it. He's got to either deal with that legal document, I can hand deliver it to him, and he has to either say, no, I don't want to touch it. Then what does that make him? How does he hold himself out as a lawyer? I think he's a state attorney of Delaware. So how does he hold himself out in that position if he can't handle this legal sworn statement? This is evidence.
This is fascinating. I have this theory, Mike, that some of these guys will get a little braver towards the Bidens as we inch closer to the 2024 election, or at least I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful of that. I don't, personally, listen, I'm a conservative. I don't want a Democrat in the White House, but I'd rather, a lot of people clown Kamala Harris and she's an absolute disaster. But as far as I know, she isn't this corrupt. And given, in my opinion, they're both dumb. So I figure I'd rather have the dumb one that isn't that isn't corrupt. That's my thinking. I don't know that she could do worse or more damage to the country into our reputation globally than he has. This guy has been an unmitigated disaster. Now, you say both Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan are co-conspirators in the Burisma kickback scheme. Jake Sullivan, who's now the current national security advisor. You know what else I'm curious about? I want you to touch on that. Were there any other family members? Because James Comer that were flying in Air Force Two that you saw, Mike? Because James Comer is now head of the House Oversight Committee, is saying there's a lot more Biden family members that are involved in this corruption, this crime, this crime business that they've got going on here.
I've never met Hunter Biden. He was on that trip to Beijing, the same plane. I didn't meet him. I did my job. He was in his circles. But Joe would take his granddaughters and his daughters-in-law all the time.
Really?
Yeah. The first trip I took a trip with him in August 2011. He took Hunter's wife and one of his granddaughters on that trip. He took Hallie Biden on a trip to Israel with her children. This is after Beau had passed away. So that was middle of 2016. And I know his granddaughter, Finnegan Biden, was on several trips. So, yeah, he took his family along all the time. It was kind of a perk. I worked with Vice President Cheney. He took his grandkids on the plane, too. I mean, it's not a terrible thing,
Okay.
But putting them on, sending Chinese money into their bank accounts isn't a good thing. I don't know if Dick Cheney faces that inquisition.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. So, okay, so that's fair. So, I mean, this is something, and I understand it. If I were president, vice president, I mean, you're the leader of the free world, essentially. It'd be pretty cool to take your family members, but now with all this new evidence coming out, I mean, with these SARs and everything, 150 of them to the Biden family, you have to wonder how many people were involved. And then I think it was it Haley Biden that we know get at least $37,000 part of a cut in the scheme. So it just leads me to wonder what was happening there. So VP Joe Biden at the time visited Ukraine. He wanted to bolster the energy company that is known as Burisma. You touched on that.
And by the way, Carl, this
Yeah.
whole Russian invasion goes right into where Burisma was operating. And they're basically taking over all that territory. And it's like, I think the corruption that Joe Biden, they knew about it. The Russians knew about it.
Yeah.
And,
right.
It's almost like it's not almost, it is like there's a mafia in Russia, there's a mafia in Ukraine, and there's a dirty cop, Joe Biden, who's basically making money off both sides. It's terrible.
Okay.
It's a terrible situation there for the freedom-loving people of Russia and Ukraine. And it's not being made better by Joe Biden, that's for sure.
That's a fascinating connection because you do. You know what's so here's what's funny. You lead me down just another thought process real quick here, Mike. I was sitting there when Putin was on the border of Ukraine getting ready to go in. I'm sitting there thinking, why wouldn't he? I mean, so many even conservatives were saying there's no way Putin's going to go in. He wouldn't do this. And I'm like, why wouldn't he? Everybody knows this guy is so weak. But if there was a not just territorial, but a financial stake that he knew that he could take back. I'm not condoning anything that Putin has done. I think he's evil as all get out. But if Joe Biden is the dirty cop and China and Putin are mafioso and they know what's going on, they're gonna take back their cut, so to speak. I know that sounds a little weird, but I just wonder how much.
I think that's what's happening. I think you're right on, and it's really a matter of getting the evidence out to show this level of corruption going back into that relationship with China. And and so you asked me, I didn't. There's 3 questions you asked me, I answered 2. The one you didn't ask me was, what was it like with him and Putin? So I wrote a chapter in my book, and it's called "Bitch Slapped in Moscow." That's what it was.
I'm buying the book just to read that chapter. I'm going to start there. All right. So tell us what transpired, what you witnessed with Biden and Putin.
Well, so, we're in Moscow, and it's a big deal for Joe Biden. He gets to be the big guy, and, he loves to talk about himself. This is the old Joe Biden. Now Joe Biden is on the teleprompter. He doesn't talk to anybody. He's just stumbling around. It's a different person now than he was back then. This is 2011. Sure. So he goes into this thing, and Putin kind of set him up. There's a small little meeting room off the edge of Putin's office. It's in something called the White House. It's not in the Kremlin. It's in the White House. And Joe Biden would later state to the New Yorker magazine, I saw Putin in the Kremlin. It wasn't the Kremlin. And the New Yorker magazine said it was the Kremlin. It was always a misinformation, basically, he's planting. So they go into this room, and they're having this meeting, and Putin goes, hey, you've been here a long time. Let's hear about your history here. And Biden starts going this long-winded story, and right in the middle of it, Putin cuts out the TV lights, cuts off his microphone, and basically, and the Russians are saying, everybody get out of here right now. He left Joe Biden speechless, which is almost impossible, right? And it was like the biggest insult. And so I actually, in the book, I wrote about, I want to find the pull reports. Well, in the laptop, I have since found the pull reports of how the press reported it. And the press didn't make it sound anywhere near as dramatic as I make it sound, because they had to be sort of, they're kind of on the team, really. If you're not writing to be on the team, you don't get more access. So they got a right to be on the team. So I wrote it straight up the way I saw it. It's slapped in Moscow.
It's fascinating. And honestly, it explains the relationship towards Biden now. I mean, we have this Wall Street Journal reporter that's basically been taken into custody, denied bail, or any of that kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm sure that Putin sized him up at the time and thought, if this guy ever becomes president, I can run circles around him. And that's exactly what we're seeing, both with Xi Jinping, obviously, and with Putin. Mike, listen, I got to tell you, this has been a fascinating interview. I'm going to, as more corruption comes up and I fill in on some of these national shows, I'm going to bring you on board to talk about Biden family corruption, because I want people to know. Here's part of my desire. And this may sound malevolent, but I don't care. I'm a Christian, but I honestly, I believe that evil needs to be recognized.
Yes.
And I want this guy to go down with the legacy that he is an evil person. I feel the same way about Barack Obama. Frankly, I don't suspect that he was corrupt like Biden, but I do believe that this guy Barack Obama had an opportunity to unite the country like no one's business. And instead he sought to transform it, implementing CRT, DEI, and governmental agencies. And I can't stand these guys for it. And frankly, I feel like that those are the legacies that they need to be remembered by. So I really do appreciate you writing about this stuff and keeping us informed on it. And I'm so thankful that I heard you on the American Adversaries that day. I mean, I texted Chris and I was like, who is this guy? Good Lord. And then I was watching Jesse Waters and I was like, oh my God, now I got to get his autograph. This is amazing. But anyway, listen. Check out his Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. Get his book, Joe Biden Unauthorized and the 2020 Crack Up of the Democratic Party. That sounds fascinating.
Carl, if they subscribe to my Substack, you can get it. It's free, or you can pay to subscribe. If you pay to subscribe, you get a book. I send you a book.
Okay. All right. So that's a pretty good incentive to become a paid subscriber. And obviously he's diving in deep. I mean, I heard some stuff that I've not heard here in this podcast, and I'm sure you have as well. So Mike McCormick, I seriously appreciate you joining us today on the Carl Jackson Show podcast, man. It's been it's been informative. It's been eye-opening, frankly. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Carl. I really appreciate you having me on too.
Absolutely. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast. We're on Apple, Google, Spotify. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Carl Jackson Show on YouTube. Rumble is the same. If you prefer Rumble, The Carl Jackson Show. On all things social media, you can find me Instagram, Twitter, Getter, True Social. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me, or SalemPodcastNetwork.com is another place to find me. So a bunch of places you can go to find me. And again, check out Mike's Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. And again, if you become a paid subscriber, you get his book, Joe Biden Unauthorized and the 2020 Crack Up of the Democratic Party. And you could look forward to reading the chapter where Putin bitch slaps. Oh my God. Anyway, all right, stop laughing, Carl. So guys, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. And until next time, do not grow weary doing good. God bless you.